Right now at Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory, save 50 to 70% off everything in stores and online. That's right, 50 to 70% off everything. Celebrate the 4th with dresses from $19.99 at Banana Republic Factory. And at Gap Factory stores, tees start at $4.99. Plus, save an extra 40% off clearance. Sale ends Tuesday. Search our store locator for your nearest Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory store or shop us online.
Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind the attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a bike or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launcher. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host,
Rodney Shortridge,
and co-host,
Robin Dalton.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by going to blogtalkradio.com/withinthechaos, or listen in by phone. You can dial 323-870-4197. And you can also call in to ask questions to our guests at the same number, 323-870-4197. From deep within the heart of the Appalachians, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight. along with my fiery redhead co-host, Robin Dalton. Well, I'm flying solo again tonight. There is no fiery redhead. Without further ado, tonight our special guest is Frank Jacob. Frank is an award-winning filmmaker and visual artist. His most recent work as a writer and director of recently released featured documentary, Packing for Mars, which won the People's Choice Award at the 2006 EBE Film Festival. He is a music producer and composer, and was producer and supervising editor for Series 2 and 3 of the hit Red Bull show Ultimate Rush. Was a director and producer of the featured documentary Solar Revolution, which won Best Feature at the 2013 EBE Awards and the award for Best Consciousness Film of 2013 at the New Realities and META Center Spiritual Film Festival, New York City. Okay, it's my honor to welcome our special guest, Frank Jacob. Hello, Frank, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Rodney. Thanks for.
It's an honor, sir, to have you on. Could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what started you on this journey to get you involved with making, your award-winning film, Packing for Mars?
Sure. The film basically came sort of as a culmination of a journey I was on for a lot of years in media. I started off as a musician, and I worked my way into digital production, doing post-audio sound for film. And then later I got into editing videos. I ended up on essentially doing a lot of live visuals, and finally sort of at a network producing extreme sport shows. And I was looking for a project to kind of sink my teeth into, which would be like a full-length feature film. I'd done a lot of shorter documentaries. And so, I was searching for a topic, and I had been away kind of from the subject of UFOs and things for many years. I mean, I was kind of a believer as a kid. I always felt that it was, a reality, but maybe not necessarily my job to solve it, and that eventually some people probably would, and they'd come out with it. Of course, we know many years have gone by, and no one has officially announced the existence of UFOs to date. And I wasn't really going to do any kind of a film in that subject, but I sort of got back into it with the disclosure movement, which interested me because, there was this group of people, starting with Stephen Greer and Stephen Bassett, that had actually called on what society looks at as very stable personalities, astronauts, pilots, radar operators, that essentially had experiences, contact or sort of, experiences of the extraterrestrial kind, and they were going to reveal that information in a press conference for the governments to tape. And then I saw a disclosure conference in Barcelona, which was run by Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy, Project Camelot. And I just sat and listened to some of the testimonies and people coming forward, like Roger Dean and people like that, and I just was blown away that this could be out there, and that the mainstream wasn't covering it. And I always felt that, it was kind of a shame that a lot of the films and subjects of this sort were kind of relegated to bad production standards or YouTube videos that were really poor, and it sort of lacked the credibility that we've been kind of groomed for in society, having been exposed to sci-fi films, and people that are interested in UFOs usually like sci-fi as a genre as well, so they're used to this super high production standard. And I always felt, it would be kind of cool to have that standard of production in something that was a little bit more controversial, but I didn't know still I was going to make the film until essentially after I got into this disclosure stuff. One night I was surfing the web and I heard an interview with Laura Eisenhower and Andrew Basiago about having been recruited for a Mars colony. And the reason that was interesting to me was that years earlier, I had been given a book by a very, very respectable, highly intelligent man called Alternative 3. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a book that was based on a sort of a mockumentary released in Britain in 1977. It was supposed to be released on April Fool's Day, but as the story goes, I guess the people at the network couldn't get the slot, and they ended up airing it sometime in June that year. And then later, that show, which kind of was like the War of the Worlds of England, of the UK. I know that the author of War of the Worlds, I think, is an Englishman, but that was sort of an American production. And the Alternative 3 mockumentary put out by this group called The Science Report was unique in the sense that it had the same impact because the show that they were producing was a factual science-based show. Every episode they had was showing us the latest development in science, etc. And when they did this show, it was kind of like a way for the writers to mock the television viewers into saying people believe anything they see on television, right? So Leslie Watkins, a Fleet Street journalist, also tuned into that program and was approached by his publisher later if he would like to expand on that story. And he did, of course, and that became the legendary book Alternative 3, which was released in 1978. And that book really it takes you much further down the rabbit hole than the show did. I mean, the show was great because, it was when you see something visually, it always has a great impact. But reading the book, there was lots of time to get into some of the really deep stuff. And Leslie Watkins began researching stuff. And he essentially, I interviewed him many years later after we released the film. And the legend always was that he was sort of an insider. He was given the green light by the insiders to release the truth in the form of fiction, because after the book was released, a lot of very, very renowned people like Mae Brussell, investigative journalists in the United States, and others, and politicians even in England, they were shocked and they felt it was like they were calling him or writing him saying, "How did you manage to get the truth out?" So all this story was going on in the background, and when I always thought it was intriguing, but I never thought it was going to be something that was actually true. And then here I was listening to Laura Eisenhower and Andrew Bouchard talking about having been either on Mars or being recruited to go to this Mars colony. So for me, that was the jumping off point. I went, okay, if this is true, maybe it really is true. I've got to know. I need to know if this is really true. So I sort of set myself a goal to try and reach out, and if I could reach Laura, for example, in a very short period of time, and she wrote back to me, it was kind of a sign from the universe for me to go out and make this film. And that's kind of how it sort of started.
Well, I don't know if you've heard the story or not, which you may have, about where there's a Marine that said that he was stationed on the Mars for like 16 years. I mean, is that true, false, or what? Because he's pretty credible.
Rodney, the cool thing is that, I think you're talking about Randy Kramer.
Mm-hmm.
And Randy Kramer, we made, I started the film in 2010, and I just went out there with a backpack and a camera, some good gear, and just wanted to go and meet these people because it is an incredible story. And it's one thing to hear the story on a radio program or, just whatever, or to see it on a film, but when you're actually sitting right across from the person with a camera right in their face and you get a chance to talk to them, it's a different kind of experience, and it opens up the opportunity for you to kind of use your BS radar and kind of feel these people out, because, I feel that I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I'm sitting across from somebody and they're just telling me absolute BS. I'm going to feel it and I'm going to pursue it. And I never got the sense, from the people that I started to interview, and then later, I got to know a lot more. I mean, I ended up meeting Tanya Maidenford, and she jumped on board as the executive producer and producer of the show, and she began opening up avenues to other people, and we began to put together a whole assortment of people. And Randy Kramer was one of those people that was, it took us, made this film over the course of 5 years. So at the time that I started it, there were very, very few people talking about, there was this guy called Michael Rife in Australia who had these recollections because his wife began putting him onto a biofeedback machine, and he was very sort of distorted mentally, and all the stuff came out. about his having been stationed on Mars for, I think, 15 years. And his story is very, very closely related to Randy Kramer's story. So I sat up and took notice of Randy Kramer, and we put him in the film, not as an interview person, but just simply as, to pay tribute to this phenomena which started happening around that time. I look at this whole whistleblower thing of these people that have virtually no evidence as also a cultural phenomena. Like, what is it that suddenly now these people are coming out with these fantastic, absolutely unbelievable, crazy stories? These stories. They're not getting rich from it. They're being humiliated by it. But for them, it's a process of working out something which is deeply buried in them, and it's these repressed and regressed memories which they're bringing out. So I think, the question is, it's up to us to look at material and take it in with an open mind, knowing that it's possible that people are telling the truth, or it's possible also that they're not completely aware of everything they're saying, or everything what they're saying is the truth, or it's just their truth. But it's their story and their truth nonetheless. And as such, we took it upon ourselves to document some of them and put them into the film because I think it's important.
Oh yeah. Well, did they say whether it was the United States or a multinational group that's got a base station or station up there on Mars?
Well, taking it back to Alternative 3 and Leslie Watkins, the premise of that book was that essentially that there was an elite group of people in a think tank that had taken it upon themselves to research the peril or the plight of humanity on the Earth. And they looked at all these factors like the environment and pollution and population, and more or less determined that we're doomed. It's like mankind is basically there's got to be something that has to be done, and they came up with these alternatives. And the first alternative, I think, was the idea of reducing the population and trying to control the environment through blasting huge holes in the ionosphere to try and cool the greenhouse effect down, which they, I think, voted in terms of the book at least. They voted it down because it seemed like, they could probably blow holes in the ionosphere, but they couldn't seal them back up again, so that probably wasn't a very good idea. The second alternative was to build deep underground cities, which then only a few people could go into and wait out the calamities on the surface and then re-emerge after everything had kind of destroyed itself, which they also felt was at the time, impractical. It's interesting to note, of course, that we've heard a lot about deep underground military bases in the last 40 years. So it's very, very curious that they would reject it. What they ended up choosing to do was to set up an off-world base because they had apparently access to some form of technology which was unknown to the mainstream or to the rest of the population under the conventional space programs of the world, in order to be able to take targeted individuals representing certain aspects of society, science, the arts, engineering, physics, all these things, and try to collect those people and put them on a colony to Mars. Now, if you had all the money in the world, Rodney, and you were one of these mega rich people that are behind the scenes that we never hear about, and you knew that something was going to affect the survival of humanity and you could do something about it, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt that they're doing it for altruistic reasons, then you would. So it doesn't seem to me all that far-fetched to actually go off-world. In their case, they would go to the moon, and then they would go from the moon to Mars and begin setting up these colonies. So I think, if we look at the realism of it, we have to assume when we're going down a crazy road like the one we're talking about unpacking for Mars. I mean, it's not for everybody to go there because essentially we're saying we're going to explore the idea of this breakaway civilization and see if it's real in the modern context. 40 years have gone since the book has been written. Is there any basis for it? Are there any signs and is there any evidence? And what is that evidence that would lend credibility to the reality of an actual colony on Mars? And it seems to be that there really are a whole collection of whistleblowers and scientists, and we've been approached even since we've released the films by people that have actual firsthand knowledge that there is this colony and that it's been going on since at least the 60s and 70s, if not earlier.
Wow. So that would if you say earlier, that's going to be predating when Russia and Sputnik, and also when we first got up in space. Is that possible?
Right. Well, it depends on, I think what people have talked about in terms of the secret space program, when its origins were. Now, there's a lot of evidence that the origins of the modern secret space program, and I'm not talking about ancient past, like there's legends and history and stuff that, we don't have to talk about right now, but just looking at it in the modern context in the last 70 years, it seems to have coincided with events taking place in Germany during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, which led up to technology being developed with the assistance of extraterrestrial intelligences that were being originally channeled through a group of German women in Bavaria called the Vrillerinnen, they were called, the Vril Society. They were headed up by a woman called Maria Orsek, who apparently through automatic writing began to channel direct information like, ancient German Templar writing that she didn't even know, blueprints for building teleportation devices and tunneling through time. And they actually made a connection with this group of ETs, which then essentially originally had the purpose of trying to assist humanity. And unfortunately, because of the way that Germany was developing in the war and the generals that heard about this technology and got involved, the women's, altruistic intentions of just setting up a peaceful technological advance and maybe even moving us in connection to these other extraterrestrial races kind of went foul and was taken into a dark direction. And that dark direction is probably what, then later Admiral Byrd encountered, supposedly that's evidence that he encountered it in the Antarctic, and that there are essentially bases, something going on in the Antarctic, which ties back to this time. Now that could be, the early starts of this, that commenced. But there's also evidence that, we didn't need the influence of the ETs, that there were people across the pond in America, like Otis T. Carr, for example, and Nikola Tesla before him. Otis T. Carr was Nikola Tesla's final protege who handed him a lot of the information about building these teleportation devices just before his death. And Otis T. Carr actually built functional devices which were able to travel through space and time. And, so we didn't really necessarily even need the extraterrestrial influence. Along with that comes, of course, in 1947, the beginning of the crashes, the Roswell crash being the most famous, and the idea of reverse engineering spacecraft. So there's the third, perspective in terms of getting the technology and enabling us to actually be able to go places and travel in ways that we're just not being told about. And there's a reason for that.
Well, there's a question I've asked a lot of people is, especially people that know that they're dealing with UFO and the paranormal. How was it possible for Hitler and the Germans to get so far ahead, advanced in their technology compared to the Allied forces, and still lose the war? And most people, they kind of tell me, well, they're because of their scientists and everything like that. Granted, I understand they had great scientists, but how were they able to? I mean, some of the stuff that they created that we do know that they have, shown or declassified, it just blows your mind that they were so far ahead of the Allies. So did Hitler know about this lady? Was she working with, the Germans to help maybe move them along to defeat us?
I'm pretty sure that Hitler knew about the women. In fact, that he had constructed a personal chalet in the Bavarian Alps, and 2 or 3 miles below that is the actual building that these sessions were going on with these women. So I'm pretty certain that he knew about it, and I'm also pretty certain that the Nazis had help. And the idea that the Germans then lost the war, it all depends what perspective you take, right? Mm-hmm. The German people lost for sure. Millions and millions of people, just like you and I, that are stuck in the middle of a country when the government decides to wage war, lost. We lost our homes, we lost our lifestyle, we lost pretty much everything was disrupted because of these events, these war events. But in a way, and it's interesting to note that, after the war ended, that the Americans took a lot of the scientists over to the United States which formed the CIA and the whole NASA and all these, rocket technology and the nuclear technologies. They all emerged from those scientists, which they recruited, you might say, from Germany. However, not all of them were recruited. And in fact, hundreds apparently went missing. They were never, ever heard from again. And if you look at the correspondence that was written by Maria Orsic over that time, there's evidence that in one of the final letters she wrote, she says, "We're all leaving. We're leaving." And so the question is, did they leave? Where did they go? Did they go to Aldebaran, which is apparently where they made the contact, or did they set up? And it's also interesting to note that the Nazis knew where to go in Antarctic to actually, go into the continent. They were given apparently explicit directions on exactly where to steer their ships so that they wouldn't be destroyed when they landed. Because at the time that this was going on, you got to realize Antarctic was virtually unexplored. There were ice walls a mile high, and there were some fjords, some canyons, and we didn't have the same technology we have today to sort of land on the shores. But apparently they did, and there was a massive, program to move submarines and infrastructure and artillery and hardware and ships and people down there. And we never really knew what happened to those people. And a lot of people believe that is the reason why Admiral Byrd was sent down to basically flush them out, because he knew that the war had, in a sense, as long as these forces that started the war were still out there, it wasn't over. And, legend has it that Admiral Byrd, and there's interesting film material out there that show, and according to his account, that the fleet of 5,000 troops and destroyers and aircraft carriers who went down there were rendered virtually inoperable within about 35 minutes of confronting this technology in Antarctic, which, looked like flying saucers. So, whether flying saucers are coming from outer space or from a terrestrial place doesn't necessarily, nobody really knows. These are all unanswered questions. What we do know is that there seems to be this technology, and there seems to have been enough whistleblowers that were part of it that have leaked out pieces of it for us to kind of try and piece it together, which is one of the reasons why, Tanya and I, made Packing for Mars and tried to connect the dots and see where does it lead, because really a lot of it is about connecting the dots, and it goes very, very, very deep.
It sounds like it. Well, did any of NASA's conspiracy theories have any influence, on your making of of your movie? Yes, I mean, in the sense that for me, a filmmaker that I'd sort of been exposed to by the name of Jose Escamilla had created some films, particularly one called Moon Rising, in which he shows pictures from the moon that were taken by the Clementine mission. Now, the Clementine mission took millions of photographs of the surface of the moon and published them on a website and even created a browser you could surf and get these pictures with. And Jose began to do that. He began surfing and looking around for maybe if there's some kind of evidence of archaeological finds or unusual anomalies, and began downloading them. And lo and behold, he found things that had been tampered with, that there actually had been photographs that had smudges on them.
that were obvious. It wasn't just something where you said, okay, that's a pixel error. In fact, the antenna wasn't really digital. They were actually shooting film. So these things were deliberately manipulated images, and his film really kind of, it angered me in a way, because I felt, if this is true, what right does NASA, a publicly funded organization that actually, has an obligation to deliver what it finds to the rest of humanity, what right do they have to contaminate or block the evidence? And it's been going on really since today, all the way from, what you're seeing going on Mars right now. And it's clear then also from people like Ken Johnson. Dr. Ken Johnson approached us after we won the Ebby Award. He was at the UFO Congress, and he came up to us and showed us pictures, and he was so pleased that we'd made the film. And he actually, there was pictures that we'd shown in the film that he had copies of without the smudging, and it was clear. And he was a NASA insider. His story is really interesting, because he was part of the Apollo team for many, many years. He was the trainer of the astronauts. He was a beta tester of the gear. He spent like 3 hours inside of a capsule, and he was part of the lunar recovery team that would take the artifacts that they brought back, the rock dust and whatever else they brought back from the Apollo missions, sorted, cataloged, and distributed to scientists around the world for analysis. And in his experience of doing that, he was pushed around to different jobs as the agency changed priorities. And at one point, he walked through a particular building and came across a room with a lot of people that were leaning over negatives. And he said to them, "What's going on here?" And one of the guys just sat up and looked at him and said, "Oh, we're just the professional strippers in here. So, we're taking out all the things in the picture that are unclear, that the public, doesn't necessarily need to see." And it was a shock to him as well, being somebody who was part of the NASA team, that this kind of thing was going on. He even has a story where he was told by his peers to go grab a film from the Apollo 15 mission, and he went in and grabbed the film, and he came back with the film into a private screening of about 5 people. And they watched the film, and as they flew over this one crater, you could clearly make out finger-like, artificial dome-like constructions in the center of the crater. And he was like, everybody, just looked at each other and said, "Yep." And they kind of nodded, and he was like just personally blown away. And afterward, he took the film back to the archive, and he was telling his brother, who was also part of the program, who was a test pilot, he was telling him, "Man, I got to show you guys this film. This is unbelievable." And a week later, he went back, checked out the film out of the archive. He had the authority and the clearance to do so, put the film up and played it in front of all these people. And when it came to the part where they were flying over the crater, the stuff was gone in the crater that he'd seen the week earlier. And he stopped the film, and he's backing the film up, and he's looking. He goes, "Hold on, people, and hold on, there's some technical problem here." And he backs up the film, plays it again, and he sat there stunned that in the course of 1 week, they'd managed to basically cleanse the film. And so, this is what's going on. And it's a shame that it's going on, and you would hope that it would stop, but it seems to be part of a greater agenda, and it has a lot to do with something, that you could go back to 1960 with, called the Brookings Report. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I've heard of it, yeah.
It's kind of the famous, paper that a lot of UFO researchers lean on to say there's 3 particular passages that are of interest. One of them being that, yes, they are quite likely in their space exploration in the coming years to encounter signs or evidence of archaeological findings that represent intelligent life outside of the Earth. B, in history, whenever society has been confronted with information or knowledge that totally confronts their picture of reality, that those societies very quickly crumble, or what's left over them afterward doesn't resemble anything that was like it beforehand. And finally, I think the third one was that the most heavily hit group of people are the educated scientists who are working in these programs and stuff, because they're the ones that are confronted with the idea that the study of nature, as they've defined it, and the laws of nature they're confronted with evidence that everything that they've learned or been teaching or studied or published is now obsolete. So, the Brookings report essentially recommends that if NASA finds something, hush about it because it's going to, cause major disruptions in society. And I think they've used that argument for many, many, many decades. Up till this day, they still, it's still a taboo subject. It's still being ridiculed. It's still essentially, whenever, they still do Saturday Night Live skits where they have some contactees or abductees on. I don't know if you've seen some of them probably. It's unbelievable. They just make them look like absolutely wacko cases. And this is in 2017 or 2016 when you would think that society, through all the slow indoctrination, over the course of many decades, would be ready to accept what the reality of the universe really is.
Well, what do you think?
That's my take on that.
What do you think NASA and the governments of the world are withholding this information and hiding this information? I have a theory that it's got to do with religion, but I mean, what's your take on it?
Well, another factor with NASA is that NASA falls under the jurisdiction of the DoD.
Mm-hmm.
As the Department of Defense. Essentially, they are responsible for maintaining law and order, and in the world, at least in America, and probably to a greater extent now the whole world. So anything that NASA sees and finds, even the scientists, there might even be people involved, and as we're now seeing some of the whistleblowers coming out there, that have seen things and have wanted to talk about and share those things through like the disclosure project of Stephen Greer or Bassett. That essentially they can't because they're sworn to secrecy. They'll be ridiculed. They'll be discredited. They'll have their pensions taken. So there's a big fear factor in a lot of people in those programs because it falls under a jurisdiction that's considered national security. And national security is a taboo subject. You don't go there. Your national security kicks in and everything is like an executive order by the president. When there's a state of national emergency, the rules of democracy are an illusion. The idea that we have a democracy because, it's the people's greater vote is just absolutely untrue because essentially there are these hidden factors in the private sector which have control of the government and will not release those. And it goes back to, I guess, that's really the main thing. It is the idea of this breakaway civilization hinges from what President Eisenhower was giving in his farewell speech. He termed it the military-industrial complex, which we all know now exists. And he warned us about a group of private individuals gaining too much power over technology so that they could run away with the technology, leaving us essentially powerless and influenced by the agenda of people that have nothing to do with the well-being of civilization or are not subject to a majority.
Well, what do you think if it came out, the truth came out, solid evidence, and it was given out to the public around the world? What do you think would happen?
I think people would be cool with it.
I do too. I really do.
Would be totally cool with it. I think that the problem isn't going to be with people. The problem is always with the power structures. Mm-hmm. You have people that are in charge of or control of a massive carbon industry based around oil. The oil reserves and the oil, we're still after over 100 years, the main forms of transportation in the world are using carbon-based combustion based on oil. And it's a massive, super lucrative, powerful business that has transformed itself and basically been married with the banking industry. That's another industry which has control of the financial situation, has the power to influence societies through the use of, financial and currency manipulation. So you have people that, that are sitting very, very pretty in control of massive, massive amounts of money, massive amounts of resources, and they're not just gonna, let people if the truth about these extraterrestrial technologies is revealed, it's going to mean there's going to be a few loudmouth people out there in the public that are going to say, wait a minute, what are they using to power their craft? How can we use that?
Mm-hmm.
And why don't we use it? And there's where it starts. The other problem is, and this is something Richard Dolan, we also have in the movie, talks about in his books, is like the big problem they have is the government's having to come clean with this. I mean, essentially, the government's been lying to us for 70 plus years about what's going on. And for them to suddenly come out and say, yeah, we didn't think it was a good idea to tell you guys about it, back in 1960. And, 50 years have gone or more, and we still don't got them. But, I guess, yeah, it's true. We did actually have access to technology that would have avoided all the wars, would have eliminated all the poverty. There'd be no more disease on the planet. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's one of their big problems is they're coming clean with it. It's going to require us, the people, to kind of reach a sort of collective state of consciousness. We talk a lot about that also in the film about awakening. People need to awaken consciousness. What does that mean? In a lot of ways, it means simply that there has to be a critical mass of people that can assume and spread the attitude of forgiveness and of acceptance and look at this as a necessary, perhaps, stage of the evolution of civilization on the planet run by humans. That they were going to be confronted with this stuff. There was going to be a rogue group that created technology. They were going to be battling their demons and us. And eventually, there was going to be a confrontation that was going to come out, and they'd have to come clean with it. And if we're cool with that, we don't need to lynch the people that have kept those secrets from us, like Henry Kissinger and others. We forgive them and we get them on the stand to tell us the real truth. Just tell us the story, Okay, we forgive you. Come on out. Let's hear it. Let's change from now forward. And if we have to phase it out and we have to look at it that way so that we don't have corruption or chaos, then let's do that. Mm-hmm. But we haven't gotten there yet. I mean, I think the election of President Trump is an example of how, people still needed a savior, or they were so discontent with the system that was in place without a solution that they voted anything in its place thinking that was going to solve the problem. But it isn't. It's never going to solve the problem. Whenever you can't fix a sick body by just dropping in a few pills that are going to make it better. You might cure that cold or that particular wave of disease, but you have to treat the symptoms from the ground up. You have to make the body healthy. You have to eat healthy, Mm-hmm. You have to basically be fit and get your mind fit. And then, when society's reached this kind of state of healthiness, mentally and physically, then it wouldn't be looking for saviors because people would suddenly look around at each other and say, hey, we're the people. Right. We don't need any kind of government to come along and fix it for us. I mean, there's these anarchists in the States I was reading about recently. They're going out and fixing the roads and stuff in the neighborhood. They're not waiting for some community government to pass some kind of budget so that they can mm-hmm. get the crew in there and fix the roads. That takes months. No, there's a hole in the road right now. Go fix the thing. Exactly. And this sort of initiative and self-motivation is a state of consciousness, which I think we're going toward, or then at least we need to go there if we're going to really see any meaningful change.
Yeah,
I hope that question.
Well, when you brought up Donald Trump, I was kind of like, oh God, oh, that has just really sent our country in a tailspin. In my opinion, I didn't vote for him, and that's like you're talking about the establishment. I mean, Hillary got the popular vote; she got the majority of the vote, but because of the Electoral College, we get the orange man, and so be it.
Well, but the problem is that none of the candidates are the candidates which would bring any of the changes required. The only candidate, right. The only presidential candidate, which I had to really smirk, and sit up and take notice was somebody who's in our film. Andrew Basiago decided to run for POTUS, and in 2016, and the platform that he's running on is all those things like, hey, we're going to release the secret space program technology. We're going to basically coming up with a tax system which is fair, and his ideas were actually solid. I mean, I was looking at the ideas and I thought, okay, I mean, it was one thing to have him in film and telling us his story about his involvement in Project Pegasus and the whole history of DARPA and teleportation, which is fascinating and an amazing and riveting story. But it's another thing to have that person running for president. You think, are they off their rocker? But actually, no. If you look at the policies, that's the kind of enlightened sort of platform that a future president would need to run on, and it would be the kind of platform that society would demand. But we're not demanding it because we're not there yet. We haven't reached that place consciously in society where we're outraged by both candidates, and we say, no, we're not going to vote for it. None of these people are working. It's not what it's about. But that's because, essentially, Rodney, we know that whole democratic system, that whole mainstream, all those pundits out there, I mean, they're just all actors playing this game in a bad play, which is leading us, essentially, down the road, down the garden path to nowhere, to oblivion.
Yeah.
It's not leading us anywhere to any enlightened place. And it won't. And it will never do that until we've actually had that shift in consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. Well, have you ever had a UFO experience yourself?
I've had recently had a couple of interesting experiences. Absolutely, I'm living in an area that is close to a very infamous mountain in the Alps that has legends of being a portal to the underground world, and a lot of UFO sightings and things that have taken place there. And one night, absolutely, I was standing out, and it was a clear night sky, and I looked over to the right, and something caught my eye, and I look up and I see like 5 or 6, a cluster of 5 or 6 falling stars, like really like big, like it looked like debris or something coming in, and I thought, wow, that's wild, and I just looked at it for a minute, and then I sat back and I just looked on the other direction, and suddenly this light appears right at that mountain and starts moving very clearly and solidly and steadily across the sky in front of me. And it was not an airplane. It was not blinking like an airplane. It was not exhibiting the normal, things that you can identify clearly as being an aircraft of terrestrial origin, at least. Or maybe it was terrestrial, but it certainly was an unusual type of orb moving across the sky. And then it got to a point where it was almost out of sight, and then it just made a flash and it was invisible, gone. And so that was pretty cool. And but I must say, before that, there was a time, I think maybe one time in Sedona, when I was living in Sedona in the 90s, I was in the back of a canyon, and I looked down to the other end of the canyon, and I saw a bright light rise up from the road, or the area, I guess, the land, about 300 feet off the ground, and then just stop. And then it went back down again, and then it disappeared. And I thought, okay, that wasn't a car. It certainly wasn't an airplane. I wasn't hearing any helicopters.
Wow.
So that was an unusual experience as well. And I think for the most part, I'm a believer simply out of the logic of we have trillions and trillions of stars out there in space. The odds of us being the only life form that's out there is just absurd. I felt that from when I was a child. I just never had anybody landing a craft like, Jazzy, in Switzerland and getting out to talk to Billy Meyer. I mean, I never had that experience.
Right.
I've had, maybe telepathic contact, certain subtle influence through pictures and voices or messages that you could say weren't necessarily my own. But other than that, yeah, that's about the extent of it. But what about yourself?
Well, actually, I've had a few, but a couple of years ago, me and my mom, she's like, 67, no, she's about 65 at that time, and she don't believe in UFOs or nothing like that. She's like, no, it's just bullshit. Well, we were sitting on the porch. It was during the summer, and it was nice and, warm night. And I was talking to her, telling her about, the things I've seen and people, stuff I've read and stuff. And where we're sitting on the porch, she kind of lives up on a hill. You can look out across the other mountains. I see a red light just slowly going across the sky, and it's not blinking or nothing like an airplane. And we're watching it, and I said, that's possibly a UFO right there. And she looks, she's like, oh, you're full of shit. All of a sudden it stopped and started going backwards. I'm like, what the hell? And she's like, can an airplane do that? I said, no, airplanes normally take a long turn, not stop and then go back. And then it hovered, and when you mentioned the bright light, we kept watching. All of a sudden, it's like it exploded. It's like a big, like 4th of July firework going off. And she's like, well, I'm going in the house. You can do what the hell you want. I don't know what I saw, but I'm going to bed. But, yeah, that was a cool experience. And when I was a kid, because where I live here in Appalachian Mountains, my dad's a coal miner and all that. And he talked about seeing stuff when he was a kid. And we was actually driving home from one of my uncles. And there was a triangle shape. Granted, it could have been, the bomber and all that. But at that time, it was big with the triangles with the red and yellow and orange lights on it. And it just flew over where we were driving real slow. Couldn't hear nothing. And Dad's like, what the? And I'm like, I think that's UFO. He said, well, don't tell nobody that. They'll think we're crazy. But that's the thing with here in the South and here in Virginia, I'm a minority big time because, I see things differently and look at the world differently. And everybody around here is pretty closed-minded and, cold. It's all it is. And there's more to life than digging a rock.
That's right. But it's interesting that these UFO sightings seem to always take place around mineral-rich areas, like coal areas.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah.
I can't remember where I've read this, but some researchers talking about apparently that these aliens are coming, and they've actually found in South America. Is it South America? Tunnels or mining tunnels where it looks like something has been mining gold, but it looks like they've done it in a way that is we don't mine like that today. It's like it just bore a hole with like maybe a laser because it melted. The rock was more melted than dug. So, hey, I'm sure there's you factor in billions of years. I'm sure there's some advanced people or creatures out there that knows how to go to each planet and get what they need.
Well, it would make sense, and there's historical evidence that talks about legends that talk about the Anunnaki being a mining operation, using us to mine gold for them and things. So it's not that far-fetched. It's just that you realize that there is a very, very ancient history which has been essentially, it's only survived in forms of legends and mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was a documented, Tanya and I were just talking about that. This stuff, the true history of us, humans, where we come from, was all written down, it was all documented, and it was all kept in the Library of Alexandria. We all know what happened to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone. So unless, we find something comparative in the future, and there's chances of that still, of course, I'm holding out for, we're kind of resigned to looking at these legends and finding evidence to support them, which is what archaeology should be doing. But even archaeology has become, like science and like NASA, muzzled in terms of, or bound, in terms of where and how far it can go with respect to anomalous findings, like Klaus Dahn, who we work with. And, we've done a DVD with the Klaus Dahn Chronicles. He talks about his whole specialty is findings from around the world which show that there's obviously technology and a civilization that must have been part of that technology that's long gone, that we know nothing about, and that the buildings and the remnants that we've seen around us, like Stonehenge and the pyramids and whatever, are are shadows of that past, and the people who eventually lived in those places from whom we inherited the history may not be those who actually were the ones who built it, or the ones who were involved in creating the culture centering around what was found in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've interviewed Brian Forrester, and he does a lot of work, research down in Peru. And he talks about, civilization before a great cataclysm that happened apparently around 12,000 years ago, which he says was a great flood that they talk about in the Bible and in all other cultures throughout the world. And that the people before that moment happened, they didn't have like a writing, or he thinks they did it more telepathic, that they didn't put no hieroglyphs or stone carvings or nothing like that. But they're able to put massive tonnage of rocks together so well that you can't even get a piece of paper or hair or something like that in between them. Something we can't do today, and that fascinates me, because was that humans that did that, or was that aliens, or aliens and humans working together? So that kind of goes, I guess, with the ancient astronaut theory.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the more research we do, the more we're coming up with pieces that seem to indicate the aliens were us. And we have a history that goes back millions of years. And interplanetary civilizations that go back through cycles that are so far back that there's been a number of cataclysms. There's been cataclysms through planetary impacts that have destroyed, planets or destroyed life on planets, Mars, for example. Then there's been civilizations that have resurrected on those places, formed again, gotten very highly evolved, and then had wars with each other and destroyed each other that way. And then there was another rebuilding of it and another rebuilding, and some of them came here. It seems to be that, what we found, and we were just in Butuan City at an archaeological conference, and we met with some very interesting people, but really shared some of their knowledge that just blew our minds, and it really just makes a lot of sense. It all sort of goes back to this idea of the Fermi paradox, and the Fermi paradox being that, hey, there's billions of planets, the universe is huge, and millions and millions of years have gone by. It stands to be the reason that a civilization would rise up, become technologically evolved, and trend across the universe. It doesn't, even in the course of the last million years, it would seem possible. So where are they? And it seems like, the universe is empty, at least from the perspective that we're getting. Now the question is, if you look at the archaeological finds that are going on, the astral archaeological finds and the cultural evidence, it would seem that it's not empty, because we were that predecessor. We may have been our own ancestors, which have, seeded us and traversed the galaxy and moved on and come back, because this life form that we represent, this biped with a thumb opposing index finger and the eyes and the ears and stuff, this form of creation seems to be highly prevalent if we were to go by what a lot of the contactees are telling us about their experiences with respect to UFOs. They're not all like we would see it in Star Wars, where there's maybe all kinds of weird shapes. Yeah, there could be, but it seems to me that, from what I've now learned ever since we've released the films, that this form that we have is actually very prevalent and may well be spread across the galaxy, and it may well be here among us the whole time without us even knowing about it. I mean, these highly advanced ETs, or let's just call them intelligent races, may well be living parallel with us, unbeknownst to us. And it's interesting that there's always only been very, very few people that have had contact with them, any kind of substantive contact. It's not like something where you've got like a village where ETs land on a regular basis, and everyone knows that's where they land. No, it seems to be around the world, only very, very few people have always made contact, and it's always been that way. And probably there's a reason for it. And another thing that we've learned now, of course, is that there's multi-dimensions out there, multiple dimensions, which could be, which is where a lot of life forms could be hiding, so to speak. And some of them may be able to traverse dimensions into ours and back to theirs again. So they become invisible and then invisible again. Maybe they don't even need starships to travel. They can just travel interdimensionally. They don't need, craft. There's got to be a certain point of evolution where crafts are redundant, almost like not necessary. Why bother? If you can travel with your mind, if you can pinpoint your mind to any place, in consciousness, if you can lock onto consciousness anywhere in the universe, and you have the ability and you're evolved enough to travel through space-time or time-space, which is probably a better way to describe it, then you wouldn't need a ship.
Well, what are your thoughts on time travel? I mean, do you think that the people that, that these aliens that we're seeing are possible human? I mean, pretty much is what you're touching on. And that the future, the UFOs are something that, we created or our ancestors created and are flying back to, I guess, maybe trying to warn us or tell us to get our shit together.
There was a time where I definitely had that, sort of a, I don't know what we would call it. I just had this enlightened thought at one point in my life, maybe 20 years ago, where it dawned on me that UFOs may not be coming from outer space, but maybe coming back from time. And that the idea that time travel, the thing is time travel, from what we've learned through Andrew Basiago and others that are involved in the secret space program, and from the work of Nikola Tesla. And then, we also interviewed a very interesting physicist, a German physicist by the name of Ernst Minkowski, who had contact with an Italian physicist, pastor, who by the name of Pellegrino Ornetti, who had invented something called a chronovisor. And the chronovisor was a device which originally was invented for him to be able to, his theory, or what he theorized, was that sound waves left a trail. Like any activity, like if you clap your hand, it creates a ripple in time-space, and that ripple is recorded. And now we're past that sound. That sound exists in this moment, but that moment is no longer now. We're now, and that moment is in the past. But he figured there must be some way that we could capture these ripples that are left behind in time. And lo and behold, he was right. And apparently, not only was he able to develop a technology that would capture the sound and record it, but he was actually able to capture in a holographic, low-grade, black and white form actual events that had took place visually as well as sonically. And he recorded those things. And they began testing the validity of the device by going to significant events in time. Like Napoleon's speech, or, being a religious man, to the crucifixion of Christ. And they would go to these events to see if they really did happen. And they actually, the story goes, and Ernst Minkowski actually went and met with this guy because he's involved in instrumental transcommunication, which is another form of communicating with those that have left the physical plane and are gone and moved on. That's why he was interested, and he found out that essentially, yes, they made a lot of recordings, and then they invited the Pope and a lot of other high brass from America and Italy and other parts of the world. Probably this elite breakaway group as well was involved. They came in and they played them their findings, and then basically the chronovisor disappeared. So according to Ernst Minkowski. But what we now know is that across the ocean, we had Nikola Tesla developing his own teleportation devices, and then that the whole military-industrial complex built around DARPA began utilizing not only Tesla's technology, but we now believe that the chronovisor didn't disappear off the map. It was actually taken and developed out of the public eye, and eventually became a device which would allow, originally, and according to Andrew's experiences, they would use children because children are not yet, formed the way an adult is and have preconceived ideas about the world the way the way an adult human might have. So they were using children to peer into kind of like a lens, like holographic projection, and to see, into the events in time. And they could not only go into the past, but they could also go into other places in the present and in the future as well. And in fact, they began using this technology, from what we understand, to hide secrets about technology in time. And they essentially developed it to the point where they were able to actually physically enter a space and go to that time and come back out into this present time. Very fascinating stuff. And, the idea of the paradox formed by going back and, like, say, wanting to go back and, prevent someone from being killed, like, someone dear to you or something. A lot of people say, well, that couldn't happen. Time travel couldn't exist because we went back in time and changed something, then it would change everything and we wouldn't exist anymore. Well, apparently that's not really 100% true anymore, because we're now learning that there's such a thing as timelines and other dimensions and parallel universes. So literally, for every single thought and decision that you could have, Rodney, there could be a split into another timeline. So essentially, going back in time to change something would only really set in motion a different universe or a different timeline. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an interesting topic about timelines and parallel universes, especially in light of something that's been happening recently, a phenomenon that you've probably heard about called the Mandela effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of the Mandela?
Yes, sir.
As far as we can see, or from what we've read about or been told about by some of the whistleblowers, is that essentially the Mandela effect is around us because somewhere the scientists working with CERN had a problem, and the problem resulted in perhaps, and this might sound a bit outrageous here. I know we're probably talking about everything is outrageous, but it's a wild idea. But picture this: scientists are at CERN. They're working on tunneling or boring through to another universe. They create a feedback loop, and they have a huge problem. And essentially, they wipe out our universe in the course of doing so. What happens? Well, you would think we would vanish, but because there's so many parallel universes, some of them are very, very close to ours. Mm-hmm. Some events that have happened in history have not veered all too far from the decisions in the world and the universe that you're familiar with. And so what happens is that some people disappear and other people make the jump to this other parallel universe, which is almost like ours, but some things are kind of weird, like the guitarist from The Who. Mm-hmm. How do you spell Pete Townshend's last name? Townsend.
Right. That's
how I know.
Uh-huh.
Well, apparently not. Go to Wikipedia and look up any old Who albums, and guess how they spell his name? Townsend. Townshend, not Townsend with a silent H. Townsend, but Townshend with an H. And when I
well, see, you made me think of a kid's book that they're talking about here in the United States.
The Berenstein Bear. Yeah, or like Fruit Loop.
Uh-huh.
Right? When I grew up, Fruit Loops were FRUITLOOPS.
Right.
Now it's Fruit Loops, Fruit ROOT Loops. Doesn't make any sense in my world. I knew it as Fruit Loops. Now some people can say, yeah, well, companies change their logos and their brands all the time. Mm-hmm. Well, if that's the case, Rodney, wouldn't we be able to find some of the old remnants of that old logo they used to use somewhere? No. It's funny because you can go back and you can actually look at your album. And I'm curious because I've got some albums stashed in Canada, and I'm going to go back and look at them because I want to know if my albums back in Canada are spelled with SHEND. Because if they are, I know that something has happened, and I'm not in the same universe that I was in earlier, before that happened.
I'm going to have to go back to my records now.
That these crazy people that were working on CERN did what they did. So, it's all related So the idea of time travel and parallel universes and jumping timelines and jumping time, it's, for me, actually not that unpractical. I think it's very realistic. And in fact, from what I've learned and what we've learned from making Packing for Mars is that indeed it exists and it is being used by, just not by us, it's being used by a very, very small fraction of people that are using technology which is so far advanced. And it doesn't even have to be, more than 50 years. If you 50 years ago had an iPad already, it would seem like you were working with magic. Now imagine if you had access to technology 50 years ago, like an iPad, and then 50 years have gone by. I mean, what you're working with right now, if you're in this elite group of people, can only be described as magic by those of us who are not, initiated into the cult of real technology. We're still sold the carbon combusting motors. We still have to drive cars that take us hours and hours to get to locations and inhale fumes. And, we're still, dependent on working so many hours every week so that we can make so much money so that we can pay the energy bill that comes from our electrical bill, which comes from the nuclear plants, which aren't necessary, and the coal burning plants, which aren't necessary, which we have to pay for and use up a massive amount of our life force energy simply to service this old, obsolete, dead form of technology. And if you had this technology, you didn't want to share it. I mean, it would give you a huge advantage. So yes, I believe they absolutely are using this technology, including time technology, and we just need to bust them. And that's what Packing for Mars is about. It's a film that kind of gets the message out there and asks a lot of questions. We don't really draw any conclusions. Tanya and I are like the Scully and Mulder on the path to try and figure out, hey, do these places where Andrew Basiago said these experiments took place really exist? Well, we went there, and lo and behold, it seems like there's evidence that they exist. So it isn't really just simply listening to, you don't need to have me tell you my crazy story. I've gone out and proved for myself a lot of this stuff has a basis in fact. And you only get that if you actually, in our case, you pick up a camera and you make a few appointments and you go out there, and it's amazing what synchronicity will happen and what you'll find.
Mm-hmm. Well, with Packing with Mars, is there anything that you would have done different with your film, or was everything that you laid it out exactly the way you wanted? It turned out perfect for you.
Oh man, you never ever have a perfect film. It's just not possible. You're always fighting the seconds and the pixels and the frames, and we have so much material which landed on the cutting room floor, which we'd love to have put in the film. But the thing is, the point is, one film can never answer all the questions. Mm-hmm. One film can only hopefully open the door to an inquisitive mind. And, we specifically targeted Packing for Mars to be kind of a mainstream film even. I didn't really, when I set out with the idea of making it, I was working on mainstream type films about sports and things and science and whatever, So I wanted to approach a film on a wacky subject like this with the kind of sanity that you would if you were trying to rational about it as possible. So a lot of stuff we couldn't really go into. We didn't have every whistleblower in the film. It would have been great, but you can only have so much time. The film is already 2 hours long. Hopefully it's a fast 2 hours, and that's the message we're getting from a lot of people. It's a fast 2 hours. That's good. That means the editing's interesting, and the story, you got to keep to the story. The story starts with Leslie Watkins' Alternative 3 as the inspiration, and we go into Planet X, we go into time travel, into space, into Mars, and we go into archaeology and things like that. But a lot of those topics on their own, we could, since we were down in Butuan City, and even before that, leading up to it, we've learned so much more that we could make a second film based simply on this whole history. I mean, you ask yourself, one of the questions that you come up with as a director at some point is like, you've satisfied, you've asked the question, would Alternative 3 exist in modern context, and who would be the ones, who are they, that are the secret society that are leading the technology and that are on the surface and living in these bases and traveling back and forth. That's one thing, this idea of a survival colony that's here, that's set up because they really do, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, want to preserve the human genome that's going to be destroyed on Earth because something that we don't know about, we're kept in the dark about, is about to happen. And I think, there's a lot of validity behind that because people feel it. We can get a lot of indications from people that are channels and people that are just sensitive and picking things up, intuitive voices, that something's coming. And we don't know what it is yet, but there is something out there. That's one aspect. But once you've answered that question, which I think we've more or less succeeded with in Packing for Mars, at least in terms of opening the door for plausibility and showing, at least in terms of collective characters, whistleblowers that represent specific types of programs that are going on. It isn't all of them, and we don't know how much of their story will pan out in 50 years, but we documented it, and it was like a time capsule. We did that, but what we're learning is that there must be some other, reason to keep it absolutely secret, and that I believe, even we believe, come to learn, has to do with this Fermi paradox that we are our ancestors and that we actually are the Martians. And, we have left behind things on the surface of that planet which are being photographed now. And there's a great number of photographic forensic people out there. God bless them. They're out there every day. Like you can go to some great Facebook pages. Like one of them occasionally is called Exclusive Mars Images. There's this guy called Rami Bar-Ilan, and there's this guy called Michael J. Craig who's published a book. These things that there are anomalies on the surface of Mars in high resolution, which can no longer just be written off by NASA as stones. Yeah, you're just looking at stones. Nothing there. Keep moving. It's not working any longer. It's like eventually, like there's some scientists, that are out there in the mainstream science, departments that will present you with a picture of a bear and say it's a lion. And that person is, the guy will be saying, "There's a bear," and everyone will say, in their mind, they're going, "But that's a lion." And he's like, "No, that's a bear. That's a bear right there for you. Look at that thing," And everyone's okay. And eventually they get beaten into submission, and everyone consensus is, "Yep, it's a bear," even though we all know it isn't. So what's happening with NASA is the same kind of thing. There's an expiry date to the deception, and we're rapidly moving in on that, and they know it. And that's why these revolutionary discoveries like, hey, we have water on Mars. We knew it 30 years ago. In fact, we knew it a lot longer. We knew it in 1976. We already knew with the Viking probe. We already knew much more. But hey, we'll leak out a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and maybe we're all leading up to a point where we're going to make some stunning discovery, which they've already known about, and they'll slowly drip feed us the reality according to the pace that they want to introduce it as. So if that's going on, that's another solid agenda. That's another good reason why another subject you could really deeply go into, and it's something I'll probably be going into in some of the talks that I've been invited to give in Germany now that we've released Packing from Mars auf Deutsch. I've been invited to give some talks about this, and I'm going to be able to go into, because it's a talk about the film, it's not the film. I get to sort of dig into some of the source material we use, because let's face it, a 2-hour film on a subject which could probably be stretched out over, a series is only the tip of the iceberg. And you have to whet, the obligation, and the thing we tried to do with Packing for Mars is to whet the appetite of people who are not necessarily UFO believers, who are not necessarily conspiracy theory advocates, to say, wow, I never knew that. I wonder if that's right, or even just a part of that is right. Maybe there is something more going on, and I think that's the best you can hope for, unless you're making a film about your own personal abduction experience and you just kind of tell what happened.
Right. Well, are you going to be doing any talks here in the States? And has this been released in the States, or is it your movie? Do you have to order it, or how can people here see it? Well, the best place to go is to the website www.packingformarsmovie.com,
and that's the site where you're going to be able to get a DVD in both English now and German also. And you can, if you're impatient, you just want to stream, we have a streaming platform. We use Reelhouse, and you can get a link to that directly off the website as well, so you can stream it. And yes, I mean, we originally brought it out at the end of 2015, the very, very last twinkling moments of 2015, because I had this insistent urge that it had to be out 2015. But officially, we actually never really dropped it out there in any big way until the middle of 2016. You know, we went out there, we got into the Abbey Film Festival in Phoenix at UFO Congress, and we won the People's Choice Award. And then we did a small tour, and we still do tours. We went to Australia. The film began screening over here in Europe, and we realized Tanya and I did a couple of interviews here on a German platform, and we had thousands and thousands of hits. Like, people here are hungry. So we thought, well, I guess maybe we should do a German version. So I went to the trouble of polishing my German, and we had some professional help writing the voiceover script, and we essentially created a mirror version in German. And that's something which we're now, since the beginning of this year, marketing over here and promoting over here in Europe, in the German-speaking countries.
Yeah, my daughter, she can speak German. She, when she was in college, she took it, and she was going around all the time when she was in the house, when she'd come in for the weekend, and she'd have a little book, and she'd constantly be saying words, and I'm like, you know, that sounds really good, but I have no idea what the hell you're saying. I said, you could be cussing me out, and I wouldn't know it. And she's like, that's right, Dad. Remember that.
So there are a lot of German settlers in your area. I think there probably were, right?
Oh yeah, there's German, Irish, Scottish. I got Scottish background in my ancestry, and Native American Cherokee, and her mom, she has Irish and German descent in them. So there's a lot of Germans around here, but not a lot of German-speaking people. But everyone talks about my accent. I used to drive truck cross country, and then I go to places, especially out in California. I was out there a lot, and I stop somewhere. They're like, "Where are you from?" And I tell them, I'm like, "I'm from Virginia and Appalachian Mountains." You got shoes on, don't you? Well, hell yeah. Well, we heard that you people are really, really poor. I'm like, well, we're poor, but we're not that damn poor. But yeah, there's a lot of different, and Melungeon. I actually have Melungeon in me, and they don't, from what I understand, they don't know where they came from. They think they're either Turkish or Persian, but they were actually here before Columbus came here. And well, like I know, Columbus wasn't the first one to find America.
Right.
I don't know why we celebrate this man. I hate it that we celebrate this man because he's a terrible, terrible damn person. But anyway.
Well, it may not be that he himself is that terrible. It might be that the people that funded him used him, and he wanted to discover something and be the hero, and at whatever cost. And unfortunately, the cost, we all know what that cost was.
Yes. And
it's just another tragic part of that human history that we've been talking about, the modern or the most current version of humanity, which does these kinds of things to one another, which are just shocking.
It is shocking.
And, continue to this day. Anybody looking at that from outer space, hovering around the planet, I wouldn't want to come down. I wouldn't want it's like, do I want to live there? I'm not so sure. I
wouldn't even want to have anything to do with people like us, because anytime, I look at my granddaughter, and I remember my kids growing up, and I love kids. The kids are just so fascinating. Even when I was growing up, it's just, I wanted to learn so much. Granted, my dad, he only had like a 6th grade education. He had there's an encyclopedia man came by and wanted to sell encyclopedias, and the whole set was like $1,500. And I was sitting there, and I was looking at the books, and I was reading through just a little bit that he was letting us look at. And my dad said, "You want them?" I'm like, yeah, but $1,500, because I was like 9, 10 years old. I understood that's a lot of money. And he said, if you promise me you'll read every book, I'll buy them. He bought them, and I read every book, and I still have the set. And
wow.
And I tell my kids, I said, that right there is what opened my mind up from being closed-minded. Because a lot of people around in my area are really closed-minded, narrow thinking. And you speak of UFOs, you speak of parallel universes, you speak of the paranormal, alien, anything. Oh, you're crazy. But yet they're willing to believe, which I don't down anybody about their religion and what they believe, but they want to believe that there was an entity that created us all, and we've only been here on this planet for 6,000 years. And I'm like, ooh, no, it don't work that way. So I'm the black sheep of the family on both sides.
Thank God.
Well, I mean, and I taught my kids that. I mean, I broke the cycle, the chain. My kids, they're open-minded. They're accepting of people and ideas, and that there's more to reality than what we are seeing or what we know or what we've been taught. And it's really set my kids on a really good path. Granted, my youngest son, he still tries to resist because my ex-wife, his mom, she got a real good hold on him, which I told him, I said, eventually you will open your mind. And when you do, son, it's going to blow you away. It's fascinating. But I was going to ask you about the structures on Mars. Do you have any opinions or thoughts? Or because if I'm not mistaken, are you saying that we came from Mars?
Well, I would say that it's clear in from monuments that have been found on the Earth, and from monuments that have been found on Mars, that there is a very, very strong correlation between our two planets. And we have in our film we have J.J. Hurtak talk about a little bit about astroarchaeology and the parallels between the civilizations or the structures on Mars and on Earth are too uncanny to dismiss as being mere coincidence. Now, I mean, NASA still tells us that those shapes that we're seeing there as pyramids and those alignments are just, coincidence. But there's been some papers released very recently. For example, two guys called Crater and McDaniel, they published something in the Journal of Science Exploration that basically took the Sidonium mounds, which had been analyzed in terms of a pentad, which had been found, and they basically took these 5 mounds and began drawing geometric forms between them. And looking at simply that, they were able to prove something which, if I take a step back and just describe, for example, even in 1820 on Earth, Gauss figured out that if there's extraterrestrials out there, we have to be able to show them that there's intelligence life on Earth. So how do we do that? Maybe we can create monuments or leave patterns on the ground that will be recognized from the moon and from Mars for others, maybe from above us, that would show them that, hey, there's some smart people down there. They left that shape. And that was back in 1820. And then, we had that film Contact where, Jodie Foster's character, I think Ellie is her name, found a series of ones and zeros in a code that she picked up, and by combining it with pi and putting it inside a certain space, she actually could figure out that there was a circle and a square, and that showed a schematic. And so the idea of a race of beings using technology or landforms, for in this case, to demonstrate a message would have to satisfy sort of 3 essential characteristics, and one of them then being just the idea of a geometric form that's self-referring, a self-referent form. It's a form that essentially one builds to 2, builds to 3. The second would be the use of prime number sequences, which would show that they had an understanding of some basic mathematics. And in the course, in the case of the Crater and McDaniel paper that was released, they looked at the Cydonia mounds again with some of the new photography coming back, because they had to wait like 20 years for them to go back over that region and fly directly over and rephotograph that, so you didn't have this lens distortion going on, which was always a great excuse by the naysayers to say, well, you twisted the picture and now it's lining up. They actually found that the directly from overhead shots lined up even better than the 1976 analysis. And then they were actually able to show a series of isosceles triangles, equilateral triangles, right angle triangles that show the pattern of 1, 3, 5, and even to the extent that they were, taking it the full distance, the shapes that they found and the connections they made show, self-referent shapes, perpetual, like fractal-like shapes that are going on, and even to the point where they were able to determine that the arrangement of these mounds on Cydonia, if you look at the map completely, it can actually show you that they knew the angle of the spin of an electron and the force of complete magnetism through the use of these mounds. And it's irrefutable. If you look at that evidence, it's clear. I mean, there's people that still come out and say, yeah, there's a lot of volcanic mounds in that region. So some of them are going to happen to come up, and it'll be exactly in that configuration. But I'm telling you, if you look at this paper and you look at all those things that they found in this paper, there's no doubt in my mind that there was an intelligence there that left those there. And it's right there in that area where there's the face on Mars, which we've now had Mark Carlotto reanalyze and render in a 3D graphic. And they also analyzed that. And they found that had very, very strong suggestion of artificial design. And these are people they're not idiots. These are people that are really not looking to jump at a conclusion. They're just looking at the simple essence of it. There's another shape that they found which looks like kind of like a keyhole. And they analyzed the shape of this keyhole, which they call the exclamation mark on Mars. And they showed that this thing in itself had a lot of elements of sacred geometry in it. But not only that, ever since Google Earth, we've documented similar keyhole shapes all around the planet. So they actually show you, and you can find a keyhole shape in Japan, which when you put it up beside the keyhole, they found the exclamation mark they found on Mars. I mean, it looks like, look, these things are potentially millions of years old, Rodney, right? So the idea of nature is that with erosion and through time, it brings in elements of randomness, more so than constructive, concise design. Now, if that were true, this exclamation mark would long since have been distorted. But there's enough of this structure intact that if you put it side by side with the one in Japan, it almost looks identical. Wow. And, Robert Schoch was talking about how these keyholes all around, there's thousands of them, they've found on Google Earth in the meantime, always seem to be in certain specific areas, and they were like monuments placed there, according to his theory, that so if an intelligence flew over the planet and saw it, they go, okay, look here. So, there's really a lot of, you don't even need to go into those pictures that I was referring to earlier, that the rover is snapping. The rovers are snapping. Curiosity's snapping pictures in a region pretty far south of something called Galaxia's Chaos. And there are two regions in Mars which are in so-called habitable zones, which may have been very close to a large body of water, which they're even now acknowledging may have one day, a long time ago, been an ocean. One of them is the Cydonia Plateau, and the other is Galaxia's Chaos. And if you look at those areas and where the rover is now, the Curiosity is on the south of the Galaxia's Chaos. There's another scientist called Brandenburg, who's a plasma scientist, a physicist, who's basically shown that there's enough traces of xenon-129 in the atmosphere of Mars that can be traced to being the kind of xenon-129 which only exists in the case of artificial weapons manufacturing. That there must have been an explosion. You can even calculate the actual like almost to the degree of power that this explosion had, which apparently is on the scale of 1 billion megatons, that took place in 2 specific areas, right upwind from Cydonia and Galaxia's Chaos. So we're talking about massive explosions which would have wiped out anything either through tsunami or whatever, through sheer force of air blast on the ground. And the Curiosity near that one area you'd figure should be picking up evidence, right? If there was that civilization and it was destroyed according to Brandenburg, well, you'd find evidence of it, right? Well, guess what? You do. It's in the pictures. There's heads, there's structures, there's pillars. You can compare them to Abydos in Egypt and Jordan. I mean, there's things there that are just too obvious that are being ignored. You know why? Because NASA has nothing but geologists, you know, on the team, on the rover team. It's only geologists. You would think, right, that the rover cruises by something which looks like a femur, or it looks like a head with jaw bones and teeth and everything clearly depicted, that if that was a rock, I mean, it's a pretty damn coincidence that that thing looks like a skull.
Yeah.
So you think that the rover would, that there'd be an archaeologist on the rover team that would say, whoa, stop, right there, back up. Let me look at that, drive around it. Let's have a picture of this in every single angle, and we'll decide, is that a rock? Or is that a bone that's been calcified, that's been lying there for maybe hundreds of thousands of years in the atmosphere of Mars, getting calcified, becoming petrified? And what we're seeing from these pictures are evidence of petrified bones, ruins, artifacts that have symmetry, which is too accurate to be random, in my opinion. So, you know, you have all these factors in consideration. We're looking at a civilization that was there. That's just simply from the pictures and the science.
Right.
Now, there's mythology on the earth, which ties us back to certain gods that came here at certain times. And these gods have all seemed to have gotten different names, you know, Poseidon, you know, Bel, Marduk. They all, you know, Thor, right? Osiris, all these characters. You know, there's a book released, it's called The Terror Papers, released by Robert Morningsky, which talks about the story of an extraterrestrial which crash landed on Earth and was taken in by the Native Americans, called Belty or something like that. I forget his name now, it's on the top of my head. But essentially, he talks about how the history of man goes back so far that all these gods and characters which we have built into our legends and mythology simply were these actual real characters, which were our descendants, which at the time they were around were heading up armies and heading up technology and flying around and craft. That, you know, they were us, and we've inherited through eons of, you know, our own catastrophes, merely remnants in the form of, you know, artifacts and monuments around the planet which we can't explain. I mean, just look at the pyramids, right? How many documentaries have you seen that talk about the pyramids and how, you know, how the math involved in building those structures was so sophisticated that the idea that there was some society a stone thrown away from Stone Age people that survived the Ice Age is just absurd.
Yeah.
There's just too much technology built into those rocks to satisfy what science is telling us and what archaeology is telling us about the history of those artifacts and where they came from. And then, you know, you look at Mars and you look at Earth. J.J. Hertog talks all about this in our film. About, you know, there's 369 words in the English language referencing the red planet. And all of them are talking about some really heavy stuff that took place. You know, it's not just like happy-go-lucky. It's like heavy history. And so the history is there, the artifacts are there, the mythology is there. I think it's only a matter of connecting the dots before you realize, hey, you know, our history goes back a lot further, and it goes back to us being the resolving paradox of the Fermi paradox.
Well, how far back has man been so obsessed with Mars or recognized Mars that you may have found in your research for this film?
Well, I could say that the research, that the evidence that there was obsession with Mars could go back probably at least 8,000, up to 12,000 years ago. You know, before, apparently there's records of a massive calamity which took place on the planet around that time. And the records of what happened before that seem to have largely vanished, but there's a lot of stuff that's survived that actually does point to a connection to Mars. But in recent times, I mean, even Tesla, in 1901, Nikola Tesla picked up a light flash that lasted over 1 hour long from the surface of the red planet. And it was so inspiring to him that he developed, he immediately went about developing some amazing Tesla device that was going to be able to communicate with this, which he believed are a race of brothers on a red planet. He even shared it with other scientists at the time. Marconi and people like that were looking at the research and saying, we think it's legit. We think he actually did communicate, and it's out there. And we have that article. We have a little bit of snippet of that being described by Alfred Weber in Packing for Mars. And it goes back to at least, if we just want to discount everything before 100 years ago, Nikola Tesla. And then after that, it just essentially, I think it's been an obsession since the modern space age, simply because Mars is the most habitable other planet in our solar system, in this dimension at least, let's say, for us to go and venture to and set up, a colony on. I think that's almost just a simple no-brainer. It's close by, it's the next planet. The temperatures on the planet are, even if we were to believe NASA's story, there are regions, temperate regions on the planet, which reach 20 degrees Celsius during the day in the summer. And there are regions on the planet which could sustain life. But, according to Catherine Conley, who's basically the planetary protection officer of the United Nations, she's the watchdog that puts a muzzle on NASA whenever they venture too close to an area on the surface of Mars which could sustain life, because, well, they might drop bacteria in there, and then they're going to contaminate the surface, and then, it's going to be all a shot, right? That's the argument.
Right.
So, but it's ridiculous because, the idea, it's funny that the Viking mission in 1976 was one of the few last missions where they actually went to the trouble of sterilizing the spaceships that they sent to the surface of the planet, so we're told. Well, why didn't they sterilize the rest of them? Mm-hmm. Well, good question, right? Maybe it's because when they went there with the Clementine, they made the Viking, they made the discovery of this archaeological find, this massive civilization. They kept it to themselves, and they used another space program and another technology to get there, which will inhabit those zones, and it doesn't have to be on the surface. Everything we've learned about the life on the surface was more or less compromised as a result of natural calamities and warfare. So where do they go? Under the surface. And Bob Dean talks about them being under the surface. There's some photographic evidence. We have some of it in our film that shows areas like Hale's Crater where you can actually zoom in, and when you smear away all the NASA contaminated stuff in their pictures, you actually see what looks pretty damn close to structural buildings that with shadows that aren't pixel errors like they're always trying to tell us.
Right. Wow. Well, since we're running a little bit, running up on time, here's a question I'd like to ask everybody. Well, because where I'm in the paranormal, I do a lot of research and a lot of investigations, and I'm not like all these other people on the TV shows. I go in with the videos and recorders and stuff like that, but I take a lot of time. Kind of, I wouldn't say Ghostbuster, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is when I've talked to other, like UFO researchers and such, I've noticed on like 2 or 3 of our investigations, we'd be out in the woods and walking in the woods, me and one of our investigators would be talking. And one time it felt like we went from walking in the woods to walking on a catwalk inside a large building to where our voices were echoing. Now, this lasted for like 20 seconds. And, I played it to Mike, the guy I was with, and I'm like, did you feel anything? Did you sense anything? Because I didn't. And he's like, no, everything was fine. I'm like, how the hell can you explain this? And then there's some investigations we've been on when I've been outside smoking and just, taking a break and looking. I'll be damned if I don't see something that I can't explain in the sky that could possibly be a UFO. And I've asked these researchers, could the paranormal or some kind of consciousness of the human or aliens be part of the paranormal world that we're seeing, and we're mistaking it as a spirit and it's something else? And each one of them was like, yes. What are your thoughts on that?
You mean when we see unexplainable, is it objects or people? Or,
like an apparition, a dark shadow. When we get voices that we can't hear with our own ears, but the recorders will pick it up because it's at a different frequency. Do you think that has any kind of correlation with any type of alien life or parallel universes? Because I think maybe we're actually picking up some of the parallel, maybe wormholes or something, where some of it's seeping in and we're catching it.
Well, I can only refer you to what I was saying with Ernst Minkowski, the German physicist who was involved in instrumental transcommunication. He would sit here now. He passed away, unfortunately, before we could release the film. But we interviewed him at 92, and he still had quite a lot of juice upstairs. And he would sit here and essentially agree with you, because he spent the greater part of his life not only documenting cases such as the one you're describing, like where you pick up apparitions and things, but actually pioneering technologies that would enhance or would increase the ability for others on the other side of that veil to communicate. And he had a lot of success. I mean, there's a lot of really amazing stories about in Germany, about people that would pick up their phone and they would hear a voice communicating with them while they were on a call with another person. Mm-hmm. And they could actually make out what they were saying and communicate with these beings. And these beings would tell them that essentially they had died, but they didn't die. They actually just traversed into another dimension, and that they were, living happily ever after on the other side. So I think a good portion of phenomena which is going on around us, such as that, could very well be us or our energy or whatever, our soul that lives on after our physical body disintegrates. If we don't learn how to maintain our bodies immortally or indefinitely, like Ray Kurzweil wants to with his transhumanist project, but actually succumb to the effects of environment, then we will actually traverse into this other dimension. And there's a lot of really credible stories talking about people that have had reincarnation experiences that are fully documentable. Kids, memories of them having lived in regions of the earth that actually go there, meet people, call them by their name, and tell them stories about their past that only somebody would know that actually had lived with them. So there's this crisscross of dimensions happening simply on that level. That's not even mentioning, other phenomena like time travelers or, extraterrestrials who are arriving here, maybe hovering just outside of our perceivable vision spectrum. There's a pilot that we got to know who flew over, it was part of the military in South America. And he flew along with a very elite fleet of people that were flying around over the rainforest, essentially, in areas of Brazil and South America, where they installed infrared glass on the planes so that they could fly around at night and pick up other spectrums of the visible light spectrum. Mm-hmm. And he told us an incredible story of how, as soon as they did this, not only did they sense, there's some drug fields there because you can pick up the energy radiation coming off the field or whatever, but all of a sudden they were finding that there were literally fleets of UFOs which would pop up out of the forest as they came and fly past them like birds in a flock, And of course, in very organized and high speed and random patterns that couldn't be a bird or anything. And they were so stunned that they spent about the better part of a year and a half to 2 years doing nothing but documenting all the filming it and recording it. And they took it to their superior in the military in Mexico, and they said, "Here you go. This is what we found." And all of them looked at it and said, "This is going on. It's time to publish." So he gave the green light. Their general said, "Go ahead. We want this out. Publish." Within 24 hours, their offices were visited by 3 guys from the States, MIBs, you might call, who went into their offices, ransacked everything, grabbed all the computers, grabbed all the data, essentially except for a couple of pictures, which he showed us, and took it forever, gone. So he then says he then leaves the military, and now he's flying over the Arabian countries, and those airlines, the Emirates and stuff like that, those people have money, and they actually installed infrared glass on their aircraft just for the hell of it, because they have the money for it. And he says ever since then, he's flying around, and it's like unbelievable what you see. He's told us about spaceships, what appear to be giant motherships that are as big as like Manhattan, floating just outside of their flight path, and then that would just suddenly move off and move away. And others that would come around and fly, little ships that would go up into them, and they've seen so many things, and that's just outside of the human visible spectrum. So what you're talking about, it's absolutely real. It's going on. It's only a matter of you need the equipment to pick it up, and you can pick up a lot more. Ernst Sinkowski did it with his instrumental transcommunication experiments, and the people in the Mexican military did it. Of course, unfortunately, we'll never see that stuff because it was taken. But it's going on. It's going on all around us. Absolutely.
Well, that's always been since I got into this. I've seen things when I was growing up, and when I talk about it to family and stuff, or just dad and a couple other uncles, you don't talk about this, they'll think you're crazy. Well, damn, I know I wasn't crazy. I know what I saw and what I was seeing, and with all these other ghost hunters and paranormal groups, they're looking at it as a spiritual way. I'm not looking at it that way. I'm looking at it in a conscious way, or parallel way, or there's something more than just a spirit or a ghost. And when I bring it up, when we speak at these events and stuff, and I tell people my theories and what I think about this, they're just sitting there like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Are you seriously thinking that?" I'm like, it don't make no sense to actually go with the spiritual way that you're all thinking. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying there's got to be more to it because of the situations and things that I've seen and heard while we've been on an investigation. And,
well, you're on the right track.
Well,
you're definitely on the right track.
I feel like we are, but I know I'm getting everybody's ringing the crazy bell on me.
Well, I mean, they all think we're crazy too after we released Packing for Mars. So, join the club.
Well, I'm a member now.
Who's crazier, right? I mean, look at the world out there, right?
That's right.
But what are we living with? I mean, I'd rather be part of the crazy world than part of the world that isn't crazy, that is crazy,
Exactly.
So all you can do is gather your evidence, keep documenting it, and at some point, it'll sort of like the wheels, of a clock. It'll snap in place, and then you'll know why you did it.
Well, that's why I told
you. Jose Estia, he's documenting rods. I mean, he's been filming infrared spectrum, a being he's calling are these flying fish, the skyfish he calls them, rods.
Mm-hmm.
They're invisible to the normal eye, but they're flying. They look like tunneling snake-like insects, but they're out there, and people think he's crazy too. But he's documenting them. He's got a whole network of people around the world that are recording. There's people that are photographing orbs.
Right.
Those are right. Those orbs that people get. I mean, people thought that orbs were absolutely, hey, that's just dust on the lens. But at some point, that argument just doesn't hold up anymore. There's too much documentation of wards and other phenomena and energy phenomena out there. Some of it is ghosts, sure. Some of it is. Like there's some haunted house stories that are real that are, I would never go near those houses because I know there's no way, I'm just way too scared. You know, I just couldn't handle it. But those are a different type of energy. Those are a different type of experience than I think what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So you just need to, you know, accept that people think maybe you're crazy. And, you know, I mean, there's a website in Germany that they call Azo Wiki or something, where it's like a wiki of people that are essentially considered Looney Tunes. Mm-hmm. You know, scientists around in Germany and the world whose theories are considered absolutely absurd and ridiculous. You know, people like Sam Osmanagic, you know, the person who discovered the Bosnian pyramids in there. You know, a friend Dieter Burrs is in there. He was complaining to me about it. It's like, oh, I'm in this Azo Wiki. And I said, well, you know what? I went to the Azo Wiki, and guess who else is in there? Nikola Tesla. I said, you know what? You should be happy. You're in good company with some of the most brilliant minds that are out there. So as far as I'm concerned, please put me in the Azo Wiki, because for me, that's the new definition of credibility.
Right. Well, didn't Tesla say that he was actually getting communications from someone for him to be able to build the amazing things that he was building?
He was one of these people that was he was able to see things in another dimension. People would describe him sitting there staring into space like some lunatic. What he was actually doing is he was analyzing the devices that, you know, he would have these theories about magnetism and frequency. You know, his idea of the universe is still way ahead of its time. And he would see these things in the ether, and then he would reverse engineer them on Earth. He would build them from these plans that he was seeing in the other dimension. So, yeah, I guess he was absolutely bonkers. But what he did, like, you know, we're using it now. We're all using our wireless phones. You know, thank you very much, Nikola Tesla, for inventing wireless communication 120 years ago. You know, when he was at the New York Fair and he perfected wireless communication, he was going to show it to the audience, who basically, for the most part, were still using candles to light their house and oil, you know, lanterns to light their hallways. He was going to show them at the New York Fair how wireless electricity works. And the way he did it was to put a little model ship out there that he steered into the middle of the lake that was on the premise, and he would put a little light bulb on it, and he would ask the audience questions, and he would say, the little boat in the little pond out here is going to answer our questions. Yes is a one flash, and no is two flashes. And so he asked questions, and people asked him, and he began flashing with his remote control the answers on the ship. And everyone was laughing their butts off. They thought it was crazy and funny. But if he actually would have told them, hey, people, check this out, wireless communication and transport control of a ship, they would have probably rioted on the spot, you know. So there's ways to do things, and you know, he discovered them, and he discovered many, many more things. And unfortunately, many of his things were taken, maybe incompleted as well. You know, I mean, he was somebody who was he was punished for being the visionary that he was, and he's, I think, sort of the man of our time. You know, we do a big tribute to him in Packing for Mars.
Wow. Well, what do you think religion plays into this with everyone's theories? I know you as a director and also a researcher. Do you have any trouble with having religion correspond with, you know, either your films or any of your research?
I think if you look at some of the scriptures, without all the dogma around them and all the ceremony around them, I think a lot of them are, you know, are good documented accounts of things that took place. And I think religion has tried to form. Religion had a very important place in the history of humanity in terms of teaching us to be morality. You know, otherwise, you know, the idea of, you know, of turning the other cheek, of being kind to somebody, about doing, you know, positive and powerful, beneficial gestures for others is a very, very powerful doctrine. And I think in that sense, religion has been really good for the planet. But it had that was, I think, its main purpose. The unfortunate part is that as years go by, they don't evolve. They're not evolving with the times. The religion is not, it's stuck in stone. And what you're getting is, instead of enlightened priests who are evolving and growing and getting new inspiration to evolve the scripture and the definition and the meaning of the scripture, getting, the worst case of perverts and stuff, everything from that spectrum to people who are absolutely stubborn and will not, they burned witches. They burned witches because witches had access to technology about plants that threatened, the doctrine of the time. So it's like religion, I believe, always has sort of, a two-sided sword. It's good in terms of just like the education system. It's terrible in a way. But, one thing I can say about school taught me how to think through a problem, problem solution. It taught me how to learn. But what it was teaching me, the substance of what it was teaching me, it's obsolete. By the time I've gone to university and graduated, all those textbooks I've learned, obsolete. Long time. In fact, they were probably obsolete way before I even got there. So I'm learning and studying and learning to parrot something which is already years in the past, long obsolete. And the only reason I'm doing it is because the system, the system to keep everything good, everything happy, everyone's got their job. And society, society and religion, and education, they kind of go hand in hand. It's this idea that we have of our current structure of humanity where we need this law and order for us to function, because we don't trust ourselves, and we still have a lot of fear. The fear also of losing touch with the tribe. It probably goes back 100,000 years to when we were in the Ice Age. The last Ice Age, if you were in a tribe and you came up with some crazy idea about UFOs, Rodney, what do you think we'd do? We'd toss you out and say, man, you're crazy. Yeah. And if you were tossed out plan, guess what? You think you're going to survive on your own out there in the wild with animals that are hungry and at temperatures freezing cold? And you're not. Right. So what you do is you compromise. You say, okay, I'm not going to mention this. I'll just deal with the clan. I'll survive. Right. And this became ingrained in our genetic code, which is a genetic code which we're still functioning on to this day. So is it a big conspiracy? Not really. I just think it's genetics. But we need to evolve past that genetic code. We need to evolve past that state of thinking. And it's going to happen. We're seeing signs of it all around us. The Mayas talked about it. And we talked about it in Solar Revolution, about this cosmic ray coming from the center of the galaxy with a certain frequency, which is affecting the pineal gland, 150 megahertz, which is the same frequency and the same effect that DMT, dimethyltryptamine, people with Strassman were having. They were seeing visions and having contact with other beings and other dimensions. It's out there. It's coming. We're about to have it. But we're still early adopters. Those of us like yourself and others, we're the ones that are the early adopters. We're the way showers. We're the ones that have to take the ridicule upon our shoulder and shrug it off and keep going with a smile on our face. That's basically it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, one more last question before we wrap this up. What are your thoughts on shadow governments? Or do you think it's like one world order that is controlling all of the mass information that you've been talking about today?
Yeah, I believe that there is a shadow government, and I believe that the only thing I'm finding is that as time goes on and I continue my research, the question is not simply, is there a shadow government, but what is the source of that shadow government? Is it a global government, or is it even an extraterrestrial one, or is it a terrestrial one? I think that there's definitely very, very powerful forces out there which are deliberately working toward manipulating society and keeping things in a certain check. And I don't think that they necessarily want us to be the ones that are going to force them to show their hands. So it's just a matter of how do we deal with them? How do we provoke them in a benevolent, peaceful, and enlightened way to show their hand, to come to us, to come halfway. And I think what they're doing is they're letting whistleblowers out there, on the one hand, because they feel the secrets are expiring, they have an expiry date, and so they're letting out whistleblowers to tell us those secrets without interference. And some of them are legit, some of them are mostly legit. There's new ones that are coming out all the time. There's a couple of like superstars of this disclosure movement, now that are, that have mainstream coverage. They're talking about really wacky stuff about Mars and cosmic stuff, and and it's like, if they're legit, great. But the problem is they might not be legit, and they might be used, and we have to be aware of that in this discernment. That we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like there was a artifacts researcher who created little fairies and bones and petrified sculptures so effectively. I think his name was Butcher. Klaus Baumer gave me one of his books, and this guy went around and built over years these fake artifacts, and he was about to publish. And people were looking at them going, this is astonishing. It's proof there was fairies, and it's absolutely petrified. And he had figured out a way to create this stuff so authentically that you could not tell the difference.
Wow. And
when Klaus went there, he actually found the guy, he died, and his wife showed him around the laboratory, and he saw all this stuff being made, and he goes, oh my God. And she goes, yeah, well, they're real. They're real. There's real art. And so he was about to go public with having seeded the entire archaeological artifact, the out-of-place artifacts community with all these phony things, right? What do you think would have happened if he wouldn't have been found out? I mean, and it would have been like a bomb in that scene. They would have said, yeah, we always knew those guys were crazy, all that stuff. So really, it's all just totally, that proves it. It's all just crazy, right? Yeah. So be whistleblowers out there now that are telling fantastic tales. And maybe some of it's true, but don't be to the point where when it should it happen that they turn out to be not authentic. Please don't let yourself get swayed by others that are really authentic, or others that are genuinely trying to recover memories and recover things that happen and expose. Because there's plenty of other evidence and plenty of whistleblowers out there that are making it clear there is a shadow society, a shadow government out there. There are these secret space programs going on. They're real, and we need them in a way, because it's part of our evolution to get past, burning carbon, cars, and, we need these things because they're going to help transform our planet into a benevolent, peaceful, non-polluting environment of consciousness, rather than this war-mongering, repressive, exclusive, and violent, and obsessive, compulsive society we have out there, which is remnants and traces of the last timeline we're trying to get away from. That's my 2 cents, anyway.
Well, fascinating. Wow. Well, Mr. Jacob, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's been one hell of a learning experience, and that's one thing I take from all my guests. I do learn so much, and I want to I'm going to order me a copy of this DVD, because I'd never heard of it until I've seen it on Facebook, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating. And it's,
well, I think Tanya Maiden for it, and she sends you her greetings, because I think you'd actually reached out to her as well, and she sends you a warm welcome.
Well, tell her I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, and it's great to talk to you. You're really obviously a very open-minded and conscious person, and it's really a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure and honor talking to you. So, do you have any plans for the rest of the year? I know you said that you're going to be speaking at some engagements. What else you got cooking for 2017?
Well, for the most part, the speaking engagements in the German area are probably going to be something which takes up time, but I'm always working, and Tanya and I are kind of always cooking up some new stuff. We're kind of working on the Klaus Baumer Chronicles 2. We started filming in Cambodia and in the Philippines, and so we're working toward another project. We just want to keep being able to make films that we can put out there without any filters on them, which can help others to connect the dots and contribute to making a few less pieces of the puzzle, putting a few more pieces of those puzzles, the pieces of the puzzle into the picture, so that we can get the greater picture. And one day, I think, hopefully, we'll be able to find out really where we come from and what the world is really all about.
I hope I can live to see that day. It'd be amazing. Or once you pass away, maybe you find the answers then. Either way, enjoy the ride.
Either way, friend. But I hope you're here for a good long time to keep doing what you're doing, and it might come sooner than we think.
Right. That's true. Well, if anybody's interested in finding out more about, you, your films, and how to get a copy of Packing for Mars, or if they have any questions or any concerns or anything they want to talk to you about, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can go to, like I said, we have our Packing for Mars movie website, packingformarsmovie.com. We have solarrevolutionmovie.com, which is another really cool film that we put together. We have the Klaus Donna Chronicles.com, which is where you can find out information about the out-of-place artifacts I was referencing with Klaus Donna. We also, you can go to the screenaddiction.com website and get in touch with us through the email links that are there. And there's a lot of links to the other films and things that we've been involved in over the last 5 or 6 years. And essentially, that's probably the best way to do it, or just, go to our YouTube channel and watch some of these videos and some of these conversations and get inspired and maybe pick up a camera and make your own film.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, sir, again, I appreciate you coming on the show. I won't take up no more of your time. Like I said, learned a lot. Wow, I'm gonna sit back and talk about this all day. But
very cool.
But you have a good night, and you're welcome. You're welcome to come back on the show anytime. You got something you want, reach out to or promote, or that's one thing about my show. I have an open door for policy to everyone.
Awesome. Well, I certainly will be doing that, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, you have a good night, sir.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. I want to thank you, Frank, for coming on the show. We have nothing but respect for you and the job you're doing. We welcome you back anytime, my friend. Well, that's it for us tonight. I want to thank Frank Jacob for coming on the show, and to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network, to Ryan and Holly for putting up with us. Also, to all the first responders and the men and women in armed services, thank you for your service. So everyone turn in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. By the way, I post our shows on my website on go to www.blackdiamondps.org. And I'm in the works of creating a YouTube page. I'm still working on that. It's taking a lot more time than I thought for Within the Chaos. And you can go to Facebook and look up Within the Chaos. I have our shows up online. I load them up and all the information about our guests. And don't forget to like our page. And so until next week, everyone be safe and have a good night.
Right now at Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory, save 50 to 70% off everything in stores and online. That's right, 50 to 70% off everything. Celebrate the 4th with dresses from $19.99 at Banana Republic Factory. And at Gap Factory stores, tees start at $4.99. Plus, save an extra 40% off clearance. Sale ends Tuesday. Search our store locator for your nearest Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory store or shop us online. Right now at Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory, save 50 to 70% off everything in stores and online. That's right, 50 to 70% off everything. Celebrate the 4th with dresses from $19.99 at Banana Republic Factory. And at Gap Factory stores, tees start at $4.99. Plus, save an extra 40% off clearance. Sale ends Tuesday. Search our store locator for your nearest Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory store or shop us online.